Welcome to the Your City podcast, where we get to know our neighbors so that we can be good neighbors. I'm your host, Aaron Williams, and before we get started, we're going to say a thank you to our sponsor. Our sponsor for today's episode is Carbert Services. Just a reminder to those in the Homewood community who haven't heard, Carbert Services offers a discount to Homewood residents on their heating and cooling needs, and matches that discount with a donation to the Homewood Library and or the Homewood City Schools Foundation. Reach out if you're overdue for a seasonal service or find yourself with any repair needs. Call anytime at 205-999-8424 or check them out online at carbertservices.com. Again, that's 205-999-8424, Alabama license number 20103. Today, I'm joined by Justin Heffner, who is the superintendent for the Homewood City School System. We're going to talk about the school system, his responsibilities within it, and what inspired him to pursue this type of career. Justin, thank you for coming onto the show.
Very glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, I'm excited to talk about this. What are some of the biggest responsibilities that a superintendent of a school system kind of does?
Yeah. So I'm directly accountable for everything, and I'm directly responsible for very little. So I have to be a generalist in everything that happens in our school system, but have a really great team who's really directly responsible for a lot of things, but I'm accountable for all of it. So that could be anything from academic decision-making to operational decision-making, financial decision-making each day, to really, I don't know what's on my agenda most days. It's a lot of it's reactive, but being a generalist of everything that we do and really honing into what makes us operate really well and function really well on behalf of our students is really the primary responsibility.
So with that level of accountability and that lack of sort of, I guess, direct influence,
Sure.
How do you handle that? Is it just kind of like crafting processes, or, how do you make sure that accountability is not going to turn on you? And
Sure.
How do you make sure that that's a successful process?
Yeah, great question. First of all, you hire really great people.
Okay.
And you develop great relationships with those people, allow them the autonomy to do their jobs, but also provide some accountability and good structures in place to ensure that direct accountability is in place, so that things don't fall through the cracks. But I think it starts first with the people, and we're very fortunate in Homewood to have really strong, smart people in these positions. But I keep a very close thumb on everything that we do, and I have weekly meetings with our directors and principals, and really from there have systems and processes in place to ensure that we get the things done that we need to get done.
So these people that you're hiring, what's your process to making sure that you're getting someone who's going to be good in that role? And what kind of roles are there to help you out?
So I would say my cabinet consists of an assistant superintendent, a director of instruction, director of operations. We have a student services director, special populations director. So really every facet of our school system is covered by somebody who's a direct report to me. So I'm getting anything from daily reports to weekly reports, depending on sort of the seasonal needs from each of those departments and what's going on. But typically we're looking for people who have good school experience to serve in those roles, and typically have served in a leadership role, be it assistant principal, maybe worked in another school system in their district office, serving in a role similar to that. But I think it's really important. I sort of have a philosophy that a candidate is 100% of a person. 90% of that candidate is who they are as a person. What type of morals and ethics do they have? Can they relate to adults? Can they relate to kids? Are they a problem solver? Do they work well with others? Are they collaborative in nature? All of those kind of things that are really hard to adapt in a person because that's who they are. There's 10% of the candidate, to me, is the nuts and bolts of the job, which I feel very confident that we can train you how to do your job, that we can get you the support that you need to understand the inner workings of your role, connect you with State Department people, those kind of things. That's much more adaptable. But who a person is really the most important piece of hiring somebody. So, of course, we look at past experiences and those kinds of things, but it's really important. If you hire really great people, typically you have really great results. So I look more for quality of person than I do maybe some of those past experiences. Those are important, but certainly not as much as just the attributes of a person to me.
Yeah. And you mentioned accountability, not accountability, you mentioned autonomy, right? So you want to give these people autonomy to do their job as well. What's the value in that when you're the one on the line for it?
Mm-hmm.
What's the value of autonomy?
Yeah, the value is trust, and you want people to love what they do and to love coming to work and create an environment that they appreciate their employer, that they have a good relationship with the person they report to, which is typically me. And you want them to feel empowered to every day when they wake up, they go, I'm making a difference today by doing X, Y, or Z. And if I'm micromanaging that, I'm not empowering them to have those feelings. And thus, I don't think I'm getting the results that I probably want.
Mm.
And it's just really important to me that we understand ownership, that we are responsible for those areas, that we're researched in those areas of decision making, that we're asking the right questions to the right people, and allowing people to do their jobs. We do it every day with our teachers in the classroom. You can't micromanage 75 teachers in a school as the school principal or the assistant principal. So to some degree, you have to just let go and allow autonomy and provide parameters in which people should operate. But really, outside of that, let them fly and let them be great. So we want to empower them to do so.
Yeah, completely agree with building trust and making sure that, like, people feel like they have ownership over their responsibilities and stuff like that. I think that all that has a ton of value. Are there any types of exercises that y'all do to maintain that trust, to build and to escalate that? Because, when you're hiring somebody, that's a really brief amount of time to build trust. What do you guys do to build trust over time?
To build trust over time, I think first begins with any kind of relationship building. So we're a very family first employer. We try to be. I think that's the history of Homewood City Schools, has been very much that. We talk about that even to our teachers, our custodians, our child nutrition employees. We want people to serve and love their families first and love Homewood City Schools after that. So I think getting on a true personal relational level with our employees is the first way to build trust. So for me and our directors, there's a lot of family talk, and there's we're going to dive into what you did this weekend, and we're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of family as much as people want to share or not share. But I think there's a human element of that is important, and there's also a thin line there between being a supervisor and being too friendly with your staff. But there's a healthy balance there. But I think that establishes trust, that if I can show that I first care about you and your family, and that comes a lot from if you have a sick child, or if you're telling me about a hard situation you're going through, what you're first going to hear from me is, hey, I need you to know, from my perspective, I want you to take care of your family first. We'll figure out the Homewood City Schools stuff. Don't worry about that, but I need you to take care of you. And if you're not, you're ultimately not going to be a great employee too. So I think it starts with that. We do a lot of fun stuff. We actually have a grill outside of our office that we'll grill from time to time. I'm the grill master at our office. So in the falls, we'll do like a football tailgate, put an old football game on, and act like we're watching a ball game on the weekend, sort of deal. We'll do lunches like that. We've had a cornhole set at the office that same kind of thing. So just culture building. Want it to be a place that it's certainly work, but want it to feel a little bit like home too.
Yeah, and I think that type of stuff is very valuable. One of the frustrations in my industry, I'm a developer designer, and a lot of that has switched over to remote work. And when you switch over to remote work, the only time you really talk to your coworkers is about work.
Right.
You don't do what you're talking about, where you're spending that time talking about stuff outside of the scope of your responsibilities. And like you're saying, there's so much value in that, in building that culture out. So I think that's awesome stuff. You're not an elected position, are you?
No,
so you don't
appointed.
have to run or anything?
No.
So you're appointed. Who are you appointed by?
Yep, appointed by the school board.
Mm-hmm.
So we have 5 school board members. We have 5 wards in Homewood that they represent. And those 5 school board members are appointed by the city council. So each of them come up each year for either reappointment or they roll off the board. That's a 5-year term that they can serve a total of 2 terms. So all by appointment, no elections, which I really find a lot of value in. I find it very challenging for my fellow superintendents who have to run for office every 4 years.
Okay, so that's not. There are elected superintendents.
I would guess
one.
about a third of the school systems in the state are elected, not appointed. And those, a lot of times too, those same school systems are electing all board members at the same time. So you could, in a given election season, have a new superintendent and all new school board members who know nothing about what's going on in the school system.
So they just come in.
They do.
There's no one there that's kind of aware of the history. And
that's right.
Are there any clerks or anything to help out with that?
I'm sure there are some, going back to speaking about our district office and people who've been there, I think you can get some historical knowledge there, but I'm very grateful that that's the structure of our city and what our city's developed through our how our school board's appointed and given the autonomy of the school board to select the superintendent and those types of things.
What would you say are the benefits of being appointed versus being elected? What are some of the tangible pros that come with that?
Well, I think we're in a very politically charged time. And when I say politics, I mean partisan. Party lines are very charged. I think people are running on certain party lines and certain values of the different parties, but that certainly bleeds into school systems, and it's in every election, and that's just a scary place to be because the truth about a school system is we don't deal a lot with partisan issues. We're educating kids every day. So if you're being elected based on that letter in front of your name during an election, doesn't tell me a lot about how well you can operate a school system.
Yeah.
So I think it gives a lot of autonomy to a board. I mean, my selection process 2 years ago was a national search firm helping run a search with our school board, who I think interviewed 80 to 100 people all over the country and culled it down over, a period of many months after getting a lot of stakeholder input to where the board could make a good judgment based on what they thought was a need for the next superintendent of Homewood City Schools. And that was a healthy process that as a community member, I would expect and desire for leadership in my community.
So with this, you said it was 5. There are 5 people on the board, 1 from each ward, correct, right? And those people are elected? They're
appointed by the city council.
So they're appointed by the city council.
City council's elected.
Gotcha. Okay. Gotcha. How does the Board of Education coordinate with you? How much influence do they have over, I guess, the school system?
Yeah. So school board members, really their primary role is accountability of the superintendent and to set policy. And it's really my job as superintendent and every employee of the school board to ensure that those policies are being enforced. So they're really more on the policy making end and the accountability end, both really from a policy perspective and a financial perspective. We have to report financials every month to the board. I can't just go in and enact a new policy that has to be approved by the board. I can recommend it to the board. But general, operations of the school system, the school board has very little to do with that. They wouldn't need a superintendent if that were the case. So.
Okay. So this is the separation of powers that, a lot of places in our country are kind of modeled after, right, where you have your legislative, your school board, and then you have you at the executive branch and stuff like that.
So our 5 school board members are fantastic. None of them have education experience, which is actually, in my opinion, really healthy because it helps them be very objective to what they hear and can keep me accountable just from sort of a global perspective of what goes on in our school system. I would probably find it challenging to hear them say things like, I think we need to choose this curriculum or, this textbook over here.
That backseat driver kind of feel.
To where really, we consider ourselves experts in the field. The work that we do to arrive at a decision like that is extensive and very, very arduous. And I appreciate that our school board appreciates that and values that and trusts us. And Lord willing, that continues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's the school board, and then there's a bunch of other stuff stacked on top of that. So there's Jefferson County, there's the state of Alabama, and then there's the federal. How much influence do these external, that's what I would refer to them as, is external factors, how much influence do they have on Homewood?
Yeah. So we have to follow all laws from the state standpoint and from the federal standpoint. So we're paying very close attention every legislative session to what lawmakers are doing in terms of public education, particularly in kindergarten through 12th grade. Ultimately, when a bill is passed and signed by the governor and enacted into law, we have to then take that law, interpret it, and create board policy out of the law and follow that. So
that's a process for the board to kind of pay attention to and make sure that the system is adhering to those laws.
Correct. Yep. That's a great example of what board oversight looks like. Mm-hmm. Federal regulations, state mandates, we are required as a public school system to follow state curriculum. So you hear a lot about Common Core and those kind of things all over the country, and Alabama has its own set of teaching standards for every course that's offered. And it's our job to ensure that teachers are teaching those standards. And that's where standardized tests come from and those kinds of things. So, Homewood City Schools has some autonomy in terms of selection or supplemental type items, things like that. But really, we're following state standards just like any other public school system would. And then most of your federal laws and mandates have been around for a long time, and those rarely change much. But that gets into special education, disabilities, all those kinds of things that are really more federal law. And that are dictated a lot by federal funding that a school system receives or does not receive.
So with that, does the Jefferson County School System have any influence at all on this, or no? No.
Jefferson County schools are
separate.
They're just a friend of ours. Yeah. They have no governance over us. We have none over them. They just happen to be our neighbor, and they are a very good neighbor. So we may collaborate on times where students are coming to us or vice versa, to where we may need to send some paperwork or things like that. But we share county tax, monies, things like that are all evenly split, things like that. But we are all our own separate entities as communities are, and governed by their own local government, things like that. School systems operate the same way.
So there seems to be some benefits to that. You have your own school board. You guys can set your own policies. You can interpret things the way that you want to. What are some challenges that come with being separate to being your own thing?
That's a good question. I really see a lot more positives than I do challenges.
Sure.
Local control is such a great thing. A community that's 8 square miles like Homewood, I would feel very certain that what's going on in Jefferson County schools may not fit what our community in Homewood would want. And so having a smaller, more intentional school system, I think is just easier, where Jefferson County serves multiple communities. And, I talk to Dr. Gonsolin all the time, and I don't know how he does it with all those different communities, because he's the superintendent for Jefferson County Schools.
Okay.
We're all very close. Superintendents are all very close around here and work really well together, and that's a blessing for sure.
You're a superintendent. I'm a superintendent.
Yeah,
let's be friends.
We meet monthly, have lunch, discuss things that are going on, try to help one another, because it's really about the success of every child anywhere near us in our state, throughout our country. Of course, we like to beat each other athletically or in academic data or things like that, but when you get around a table, these are people who care deeply for the success of kids, and we want to help one another, and that's a good thing. But I would say, really only positive things to say about a small local school system.
Okay, so really it's just a benefit and not as many drawbacks. Yeah. Very few challenges there.
It's this is my opinion, but I just think it's the best way. You have one high school, it's your flagship school. Everybody in town shows up on a Friday night for the football game. The parades are vastly attended. There's a small community feel in a large metropolitan area, and that's really such a gift to our schools, and I think our schools are a gift to the community in that same way.
And I can see how that would flow into building a lot of community support and a lot of community trust, right? You know, we were talking about trust being so valuable earlier. I feel like having your own standalone can give such a tremendous more amount of trust to the system.
It does. And it also, you know, you're thinking about your tax dollars and that property tax that you pay for the home you own, and even your local sales tax. It is really nice to know that's going directly to my local schools. It is literally benefiting my own children. Where if you attend school in a large county school system, you sort of wonder how those monies are being allocated, and you start wondering why they built the new football stadium for this community, you know, a couple towns over, and why not us, and those kind of things. That I think there's more challenge there, in my opinion.
And it just creates the opportunity for doubt.
It does.
You know, like it doesn't matter if you're doing the best job possible with the finances and you're making the best possible decisions. The opportunity for doubt is there. You've got so many people, and you're making decisions for people that are relatively further away from you. So the opportunity for, hey, is this person making the best decision? Are they doing the right thing? Like, it just increases the further away from the people affecting people. The further away you get from it, the more doubt you increase.
Yeah, you certainly always wonder why something's going on somewhere else and not in your own community. So I would certainly say that's the case.
With community trust and things like that, we're talking about parents and parent voices. How do you include them? Because at the end of the day, you told me earlier that your students are your primary customers and your parents are your secondary customers. How do you make sure that parents' voices are included in the process and sort of weighed to make sure that, you know, hey, their influence is going to create success?
Yeah. So I'll answer the question with a little bit of history. So I've lived in Homewood for, I think, about 13 years now. I'm originally from Texas. I've only lived in Homewood. Raised our family here. We go to church here, play our sports here, all the stuff. I had the privilege of being a teacher at Homewood Middle School years ago for a stint before I got into school leadership. And even, you know, in my entire time in Homewood, there's been a strong parental focus in terms of getting feedback from parents, even from all stakeholders. So we're very involved with the city council. Have lots of conversation with them. They're very, very good to us. And really looking at, if you have a successful school system, you're going to have a successful community. And that's a cyclical success of quality communities have quality schools have quality communities. And so part of that success is having really great relationships for a very long time. Many, many years, Homewood City Schools has had great relationships with its parents. And that looks like a lot of committees for a lot of different things, be it big, be it small, having parent voices involved in that. We don't always make decisions based on what we think is popular vote by parent or something like that, but we want parent input. And honestly, you know, we've missed that the last couple of years through pandemic, is really not having parents in our schools. We have very open schools. We have large parental lunch visitors and programs and just things where parents are in and out of our schools all the time. And I think that helps develop trust in and of itself, because our doors are pretty open.
Yeah, the open door policy.
Yeah, it's pretty open. Even having a superintendent, you know, I pride myself on being easy to get in touch with, to be approachable, those kind of things. You're going to find me at the football game Friday night, running up and down the sideline, in the stands, all the stuff. I love it when parents come and talk to me. I always want to hear how their kids' experiences in our school system. And I think that's just, it goes back to relationships and valuing a parent's opinion, and ultimately taking that opinion as a host of other data to use in decision making and making great decisions. So we would not be a school system without our students. That's why they're our first customer. But we also know that parents have a lot of choice in schools, be it private school, home school, other communities around us that have great school systems, and we want to be the destination for those families.
Yeah, okay. So in this, talking about considering that, I guess the idea of like a student as a customer, right? Like they're the ones who are getting the product and walking out the door with it. What are some key factors? What are some identifiable steps to setting up students for success? Once once they, toss their cap into the air and they're moving on, what are some steps that you guys do to make sure that they're moving on somewhere that is going to be successful?
That may be one of the things that keeps me up at night currently. We always sort of wonder, did we do everything that we can do in the time that we had them to ensure that they're successful as they leave us? That approach for us, again, we sort of value ourselves as small business. We are a small community. We have 5 schools, 3 elementary schools, 1 middle school, 1 high school. We look at opportunities to individually serve students. So whatever those individual needs are, and we do a lot of sort of curating data and ensuring that we know how students are progressing academically, socially, even now emotionally, as the trauma of pandemic has come in. I mean, we are keeping a close thumb on every individual student, which really allows us to set targets and goals for them as they traverse kindergarten, first grade, second, all the way through, high school and beyond. So a very individualized approach, which is challenging in public education when you have 20 kids in a class or, sometimes more. You want that individualized service, and that service then extends to parents saying, hey, here's where we believe your student is academically. Here are the goals that we have set for them. Partner with us. Here are some things that we think you could do at home. Read to your child. Talk about school. School is a good place. It's a place that we want them to enjoy, those kind of things.
So part of it's setting up an environment at the school, but another part of it's educating parents.
Absolutely.
Is what part of that goes into equipping teachers?
We probably spend more time and more money than any school system I know of professionally developing our teachers. I bet our teachers would probably say to some degree, please stop. We get it.
We're over-equipped.
That's right. We are over-equipped. But the world changes so quickly, and education changes so quickly, and technology has, of course, sent us into a warp speed over the last 10, 15, 20 years. And so the constant changes in education are just rapid, and our teachers need to have the tools in the toolbox to do a really great job for our students. Then on top of everything educational, you have new social issues that are happening over the last number of years that, as much as you don't want it to happen, those issues are coming into our classrooms, and having to navigate those types of things and the hot topics that you can or cannot talk about, and just those kind of things that you want your teachers to be prepared for those things as well, be it a student or a parent in those scenarios. So it's a constant work, and we feel like if we're not working towards developing teachers, then we're working against the process of them growing into something better than they are today.
Yeah. So going back to being appointed, you were relatively new. I don't know how long superintendents normally last, but within the last 2 years, right?
Yes.
What was that taking over, somebody who is retiring? What was that process like? What was the transition like? How did you handle that?
So first, I'll say that superintendency across the country is a superintendent to stay in the same school system is about a 3 to 4 year timeline. It's almost like
so
college football coaches.
You're halfway through your tenure.
Homewood has a long history of superintendents serving for many, many years. So Dr. Cleveland before me, I think, was 12 years. Dr. Newton before him was somewhere between 8 and 10. And so that consistency of leadership, I think, has really been the success of Homewood. So I'm a relatively young guy in our profession. I hope to spend the remainder of my years in Homewood. That's the goal. So I hope to be another long-serving superintendent. But this is my second year of superintendency. So I came in, my first task was to open school back up after it had been shut down the previous March. Dr. Cleveland, who was there before me, was my superintendent when I was a teacher here.
So you came in with fires going, alarms on, like situation high alert.
It was crisis mode. We were in crisis mode. Dr. Cleveland is a guy that I deeply love and respect, and a guy that I never wanted to follow in any position because he's so good. His kindness to me and our family is just incredible. He helped the transition so much, and he and his wife have really just come around my wife and I and really loved us well and helped us transition, and also he's done a good job of keeping his distance and letting me lead and fail. And I'm sure there are many times where he's probably wanted to call and go, don't do that. But he's been very, very kind through all that. So I think the transition was good, but it was in such an awkward time of pandemic that he very wisely and kindly, he announced his retirement prior to pandemic. And then when all went crazy in March of 2020, he actually said, well, let me stay on a few more months and make sure that this is okay. So that was really great of him to do that. But it very much came into crisis, and getting schools open, and so many mitigating strategies and requirements at that time from the governor, and ensuring that we were, creating the safest place and all of that. But it was an interesting transition. Now sitting here at this time of year, April of 22 is about the first time that I felt like I actually do superintendent work and not necessarily public health work. That's been nice.
Man, you come in and it's just everything's going crazy. What is the process for aspiring superintendees?
Yeah.
Or I guess superintenders. I don't know what the word is, but for people who are aspiring to end up in a position like this, how does that process to become considered for this look like?
It's a pretty standardized process. In our state, you've got to hold certain credentials to be eligible for school administration positions. And that's anything from assistant principal to central office leadership to superintendent.
So some historical resume.
Yep.
You got to have those positions checked off.
Yeah, and I think, I was never an assistant principal. I went from the classroom to a district director position in another school system, which is a very odd professional journey. So never an assistant principal. From the district office, I went to a principal position and opened a brand new school. And so my path was a little bit different than some, but we're in a challenging time of finding people who want to be superintendents. So I don't know the statistic, but much like many industries now, superintendents across the country, I think somewhere around 20 to 30% of those are retiring now, and certainly in our state. So we're seeing a lot of openings. But typically, you'd see somebody who was a great teacher, great leader, come into an assistant principal type role, do a really good job, was allowed to run a building as a school principal, who showed a lot of skill there, who may have served at the district level, and just sort of continued this path of success and applied and networked out there and met people and convinced the school board that they were worthy of a superintendent position.
So it's really just kind of like work your way up the hierarchy of the leadership and get into those assistant principal, be ambitious in that area, and that ambition, you'll get recognized by your local boards or something like that. Is that kind of it?
Yeah, I'm probably not a great person to ask to sort of flesh that out. But in Alabama, that's typically the route. That's a very typical, road for a superintendent.
Those are the people that they're going to look at first. Is hey, who are the current leaders?
Right.
Okay.
And then all over the country, you have superintendents with no education background, but maybe they were the CEO of some other company and wanted to get into the school world and do that. That's not really typical in our state. I can think of a couple of superintendents who that's been the case, but usually, to really earn the trust of teachers and the staff, you kind of have to you have to walk the walk and talk the talk, of course, but it's really nice to have some institutional knowledge of what they're doing and the hardship, that a teacher faces. And to be a true instructional leader, I think is really important in any leadership role in education. And we're such a unique industry to where coming as a CEO from the business world or, somewhere else is you're just going to be met with challenge of you can probably be a great leader, but to say I've walked in the shoes and taught in a classroom and done those things, that means a lot to teachers. And I think that's important.
It could be a challenge when you have a manager that you feel like doesn't understand the process or doesn't understand the role. that you're playing, that can be a really big challenge.
It is.
So I can see the value in what you're saying of like having somebody that has been there or probably has even you've worked under at some point,
Sure.
something like that. When you're working on sort of, I guess, aligning all of your schools, you're going from kindergarten all the way to 12th. You guys don't do anything for college. Okay, so like from start till end of high school, how do you guys measure? Yeah, we talked a little bit about this, about setting students up for success. How do you measure which of those schools is, let's say, underperforming
Sure.
or performing up to the standards that you're wanting to set? How do you measure the success of an entire school?
That is a large challenge. So you have in our school system this year, we had one of our elementary schools was a national blue ribbon school, which is about the highest award that any school can receive. It's a national award that's given at the federal level. And you look at all of our schools, and especially our elementary schools, which are actually comparable because we only have one middle school and one high school. Our elementary schools are also different in terms of poverty and affluency, and you look at things like transiency, how many students are coming from other school systems to these different pockets of our community, which ultimately has to do with home values in one area opposed to another area of town, those kind of things, where you can't just use just straight academic data, be it test scores or those kind of things, to really measure success. You've got to you really have to pinpoint and drill down as far as you can in some of that data to really see where that success is. And success to me is measured in multiple ways, but one of those pieces of success is a student who comes to us from a neighboring school system who may be behind a couple of grades in reading. And in 1 year, we'll see those couple of grades come back. That is outstanding success. You're not going to see that on any newspaper report or things like that, but that's true success of what we do with students that we have for an entire school year and the growth they make. And then you multiply that by a school in general, really shows the success of those teachers and what they're doing in the classroom.
That's an interesting tactic to kind of measure yourself against other school systems, is to, hey, let's look at students who are migrating here and let's look at how they performed when they got here and how they're performing after a year or two. That's an interesting perspective to do that.
Yeah, so we have no control, of course, what happens to them when they're not with us, but we have absolute control when they're with us. So we want to ensure that we're doing everything possible that we can to help them grow and be successful. And there in our area, there's a lot of comparison to our neighboring school systems and how they perform on AP scores and all these things, and you really can't compare. It's very apples and oranges to me, and that really has to do with who your students are, what type of population you have. I think we're sitting at 22 to 24% poverty total in our district. Where our neighboring school systems, our smaller independent school systems, not our large county school systems, but those small city school systems have far less poverty than we do.
We're talking about like Vestavia and Mountain Brook.
Yep. I would even say Trustville. A lot of those that we're compared to in all areas, we sort of look at each other and go, what are they doing and how are they doing over here? But really, it's what's so special about Homewood to me is that we do have a higher poverty rate. And we have challenges that are very unique to us that our neighbors don't have, and our students still do so well academically and athletically, and just from an extracurricular standpoint. That's something that really separates Homewood, I think, from many, many places.
Yeah. Why is poverty such an important factor?
Yeah, it's a massive factor. You think of what I described earlier as parental involvement. Typically in poverty situations, you have hardworking parents who aren't home as often, or when they're home, they've been working all day and working jobs that are, sometimes different jobs than our more affluent families. And
so perhaps multiple jobs.
Yep. Multiple jobs, single parent situations from time to time too. And so, the parental involvement, they don't love their kids any less than any other parent. They may not have as many resources. We have students who don't know where breakfast is going to come from and rely on our schools to eat. They rely on our schools to have good adult interaction. Typically in poverty situations, you're looking at you're looking at basic needs being more challenging to find. So the importance of school is lessened just by the fact that I'm wearing dirty clothes today. I'm not sure where the next meal will come from outside of school. Will my parents be home when I arrive home safely? Just sort of those just natural needs that true needs, not wants but needs.
Yeah.
That are just unmet based on poverty lines, which is
Yeah.
unfortunate.
I see. And so that can cause, like, you have a student who has all of these concerns on top of all of their educational concerns. Like you said, a lack of resources, and there's this additional layer of stress that adds a bit of a weight
It does.
to things.
It does. And I think our teachers are very cognizant of that's where you differentiate education. You can't teach every kid the same way in your class because not every kid has the same need. And so a child who's concerned about, I woke up this morning and mom was not home from work and I found my way to school and I am still wearing the same shirt I wore yesterday and I didn't have breakfast, so I'm starving because I may or may not have had dinner the night before. Maybe my last meal was lunch at school the day before. I don't have a pencil. I definitely didn't do my homework. Our power was cut off, so I didn't have light to do my homework. And these are all real issues, even in Homewood, Alabama, that most people don't assume those are issues for us, but they really are. And meeting the needs of those students is priority one for teachers. And you've got to take care of those basic needs before you can ever educate a child. But that's where they're going to feel loved, supported first, and they'll do anything for you when you care for those needs. So our teachers do a really, really great job of that.
Yeah. Going back to a little bit about process. So let's say you're looking at something, you see something that might be a problem. What's your approach to kind of like coming up with a solution for, let's say, a problem that you've identified?
So I work primarily in problems.
Yeah.
That's a responsibility of a superintendent, I guess, or any leadership. So I think first it's most important to sort of categorize what type of problem it is. How much time do we have to solve the problem? So
like identifying how much time is on the problem bomb, I guess. Yeah, there's a timer ticking down on.
Yeah, there was a book that I read in my doctoral program called Surfing the Edge of Chaos, and what's most memorable about that book to me are this researcher said there are 4 levels of chaos. The first level being the lowest level is you have a lot of time to really think about a problem, find a solution, be collaborative, all the things that you would like to be. Level 4 is very chaotic. And I always equate it to the building's on fire. It's my job to get everybody out. What type of decision making happens then? So it's very fast, very firm, no collaboration, go this direction, go that direction.
And that's the type of stuff that you want to have some established patterns prior to the chaos happening, right?
Yeah. So we have emergency plans, of course, for about every emergency that you could think of. We've tried to be proactively thoughtful in all of those processes, but I would say that the majority of problems sort of hover in the 1 to 2 range, maybe get into 3. Certainly there are some level 4, but for me, I try to be very methodical, strategic in why we make decisions for a problem. I involve a lot of people, so that goes back to, again, if I have time to give some good thought, I want parent feedback and I want community feedback. And what is it going to look like if we solve this problem with this decision? What are the ramifications, the ripple effects of that? I always involve that cabinet team with me. They I think are very annoyed at times with how much I want to talk through situations, but they're very smart people. I don't claim to be the smartest person in any room I'm in. And so I rely very heavily on a lot of input to make the best decision. So there's not a formal process, but we involve, depending on what the situation is, but we certainly involve principals. That cabinet I discussed, giving good thought. We always consider what our policies say, as we talked about policies earlier. So we're always going to follow the law. We're going to enforce policies. Or we're going to make decisions that best benefit kids. So at the corner of every problem and solution is we ultimately say what is the best case scenario for our students in this situation. So that's where it comes back to them being the first customer.
Yeah.
So, and I think if that's your if that's your compass, is doing what's best for kids, typically we land on the right side of things.
I think that's a good guiding star, you
Yeah.
know. With all that in mind, what are some areas that you think the Homewood School District could currently improve on?
Yeah.
What are some active problems that you're trying to solve?
From 1995 on, we've done strategic planning, and strategic planning is a process of involving many stakeholders to come up with basically a 5-year planning of goals and things that we want to do. And
Where do these stakeholders come from?
these are, so when I say stakeholder, I mean students, parents,
Okay.
parents of students,
Yeah.
community members, city leadership. And so that's not everybody having a voice, but that's having pockets from all of this, and being very strategic in inviting parents from lots of different backgrounds and to really represent our student population. You always want teachers to have a voice in that process too. So we really we sort of set the stage and the course for the next 5 years every time we do a strategic plan. So we just went back through the strategic planning process. Really from September to February, we did that process again this year to really set us up for the future. In that process, when you just start asking questions and you tell the room, hey, we're honestly trying to figure out the truth about our school system, the good, the bad, the ugly, because we want the benefit of being as great as we can be moving forward.
You want accurate measurement.
We do.
You can't.
We want truth.
You can't fix things that you don't measure.
That's right. And a lot of things came out of that I really didn't know were problems until you started hearing, and you go, wow, I need to investigate that more. You know, a major point of emphasis right now that really came out of strategic planning is, what did pandemic do to our students from an academic sense and from a mental health sense? I know what it did to me as an adult, and I certainly didn't go through anything like that when I was a school-age person, and none of us did who are adults now. But I think trying to assess what happened to our students and how to best serve them is something really challenging right now. And academically, I think we can measure that far greater than we can from a mental health or trauma standpoint. But from a country perspective, certainly from a state perspective, we've seen mental health issues in adolescents just skyrocket from the pandemic. And again, those students are bringing those issues with them when they come through the school doors. So I would say that's one of our greatest challenges right now, is really trying to figure out where do we go in terms of providing those supports for our students, also providing those supports for our staff. Our staff have been through so much, and we're trying really hard to be an employer that takes great care of our staff too. So that's what I feel like right now is the biggest challenge, is really coming out. Pandemic is not over. It's something I think COVID-19 we will live with for many years, I suspect. But I think knowing more about the disease and learning what's livable with the disease has changed the trajectory of how we do school and those types of things. But as I mentioned earlier, I think we're just now really able to get back to the basics of what we do in our core business of teaching and learning. So finding those solutions is going to be, it's not going to be a quick process. That's going to be something we have to be pretty methodical and thoughtful about doing.
Okay. Stepping away from the school system and shining the light on you now.
Okay.
You studied at Samford, right? Here in Homewood?
Yep.
Okay. What was that experience like?
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm a native Texan. I grew up in Texas and did my undergraduate and one graduate degree worth of work in Texas. Never thought I would be in Alabama. Chased my girlfriend at the time, who was a long distance relationship, decided that it was my chivalrous duty to come this way at some point, and she agreed to marry me, which was even better. So never assumed I would be here, but in my trajectory of things that I aspired to do, I felt very much that an advanced degree was needed for the things that I wanted to do, and really thought as an adult, which is very different than being an 18-year-old or even 22-year-old kid deciding on college experiences. Being an adult, a married adult, responsible for a spouse and hoping to have children and those types of things, I really shopped hard thinking about that next degree and the doctoral program I wanted to go to. And I looked at some very fancy schools and had lots of conversation and talked about moving our family and doing all these things. And ultimately, when shopping Samford, I just fell in love with the faculty, and it's such a practitioner-based program historically, and lots of former superintendents teaching some of those courses, and so it's very, very practical knowledge, and they're very customer service focused, which is important to me. So just had a fantastic experience through multiple degrees. Was able to do some leadership type stuff, sitting on faculty searches, and served in some other ways, and just really tried to immerse myself in all things Samford School of Education as I could, and I think that I'm greatly benefited because of who they are and what they desired in my success.
Well, one of the things that I noticed when I was reading up on you is you had a number of awards, some at Samford and some in your career. What do you think that you're doing that has been making you stand out and achieve that level of success?
I think first and foremost is I find very little value in personal success in terms of accolades. I don't really like attention on me, which is odd because I'm a superintendent, but I desire very much for the things that I'm involved in to be successful, but personal success and gain is not a priority to me. I'd much prefer for somebody else to achieve those things and to be recognized, but I don't think there's anything special about me or what I do. I think that I care deeply about what I do. Try really hard to be a person of my word and be very clear about expectations, and treat people really well and care for them first, and typically the rest of it sort of sorts itself out. But I'm very fortunate to love what I do, and I really love the community that I serve. And so, having lived here, raising our children here, all of those things, people a lot of times, it's been really hard to be a superintendent over the last 2 years, and people go, "Why in the world would you do this?" And I look at them and I go, "Why in the world wouldn't I do this? This is the greatest thing that I would be able to do." And I get to be my children's superintendent. I wouldn't want anybody else running the school system. I would rather do it myself. So it's a gift for sure. And I don't, even the accolades I think you're speaking of, I couldn't even name them.
That's how little you
I
pay
don't,
attention to it.
somebody read my bio the other day when I was speaking at an event, and I sort of laughed and thought I totally forgot about those things. But I think the mark of a great leader is somebody who humbly serves. Servant leadership is a big part of what I would categorize, what I try to be, and I fail at that a lot. But if I approach every day with the mindset of I'm here to serve somebody else at no gain to myself, I really think that I sleep better at night doing that, rather than what type of power can I control, or whatever else. But that's my leadership style.
Well, I know you're downplaying how much you think you're effective on this, but I heard honesty, integrity, focusing on the problem, right? And, humility in that. And I think, that probably those traits right there of always trying to make sure that you're serving other people and creating success for other people, right?
Yeah.
So
that's the goal.
Being a good neighbor.
Yeah, it really is. And I think, to be a good neighbor really means it's not about self. It's about, what can I do for my neighbor? And really, there's some faith based parts of this that are very much at the core of who I am. My wife is also the most thoughtful person that I've ever known. And just what I gain from that experience, being married to her, or being around people who are like-minded in those ways of serving others. We are in such a contentious part of history that people are just after one another and very ugly to one another.
Yeah.
And it's very rare for somebody to just go, "I'm sorry. What can I do for you? How can I make this experience better for you?" There is a lot of humility to that, but that's also just, I believe that that's our role to play, certainly as educators. I mean, there is no personal glory in being an educator. It is a down and dirty job. You got teachers on the floor teaching kids, climbing on chairs to I mean, they're all over the place. They're around these.
I mean, you got a gang of 30 hooligans coming after you.
That's right. All day, every day, climbing all over you, doing all this stuff, and it's for their gain. It's not for the teacher's gain. And so it's, I think being an educator in general, whether it's teacher, administrator, even to our custodians and our child nutrition staff. I mean, everybody's in a role of service, and I'll push the trash can around the lunchroom. I'll serve lunch. I'll clean the bathrooms. I've done every one of those things this school year at one of our schools. I'll give a teacher a break in the classroom. I'll take the kid who's crying and go talk to them, walk them around the track. I'll make the hard phone call to the parent. I'll own the mistakes, and I'll claim none of the success, because the success really lies with our teachers in the classroom and what they do with our kids. And really our kids just working really hard to create those successes too. So I don't know that I do that any differently than any other, education servant out there, but that's my philosophy.
Yeah. Well, what inspired you to even want to get into this field? You talk about as an educator and stuff like that. What made you want to do this?
I'm a strange person, and it takes a little bit of crazy to want to do jobs like these. But so oddly enough, I spent three of my undergraduate years in pre-medicine, sport medicine. So I thought I was headed in a medical route.
What is sports medicine?
Yeah, I wanted to be involved in sports and fixing athletes who had broken bodies.
Gotcha.
We have Andrew Sports Medicine here with these really great physicians and do all this great work. I wanted to be one of those guys when I was in college, and they're far smarter than I am.
Taking a broken athlete and putting them back together.
So changed my major after a cardiac rehab internship, and I thought, I don't ever want to do any of this stuff. I really fell in love with the English department at my university and thought, well, I'll just be an English major. And then I thought, what do you do as an English major? And I thought, I've always loved kids. I've always wanted to be around kids. My parents said from the time I was, a toddler walking around, I just loved babies. They always thought I'd be a pediatrician. And so just being really drawn to kids and loving reading and writing, I just thought, I'll give this teaching thing a gig. But I was born a teacher. My parents were teachers, sort of thing. I grew up in the cotton industry in West Texas. I probably shouldn't share this. No superintendent should share this, but I wasn't a big fan of school. I was a big fan of sports. I was a big fan of the social parts of school. I loved going to school. I didn't love going to class. And I didn't really develop that love of learning until probably when I was an adult. So now I love to learn. Avid reader. Want to learn about everything that I can. I'm a jack of all trades kind of guy. I know a little about a lot of things, but I'm not a master of really any of that stuff. So I sort of fell into teaching more than most people, I think, in our organization would talk about how they were born a teacher and, just sort of came up that way. But I just really wanted to make a difference in the lives of kids and thought that, they would maybe be drawn to me and listen to me because they were younger and maybe adults wouldn't. Mm-hmm. And secondly, I just put a lot of value in the fact that they needed somebody who cared about them. And I didn't see that around a lot. I had a great experience as a student, had really loving teachers and coaches and those kind of things. And the impact they had on me when I actually took some time to reflect as a college student, which was very rare, I think I just realized that I needed some real meaning and real purpose for me, and that was something that I feel like was being tugged on my heart, and I followed the tug, and it's been the greatest adventure ever since.
All right.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, you ended up where you,
That's right.
You may not have started on that path originally, but, you took a shortcut or two and you stumbled into it.
I did. Yeah, I did.
That's cool. So you were talking about your past experiences. You've been a principal, a teacher, a coach. Mm-hmm. All right. So with all of that, what has been your favorite role that you've been? Is it your current one or is it one of the older ones?
What I dislike about my job the most is right now as superintendent is I don't get as much student interaction as I want. And I certainly have the choice every day to walk into a school or into a classroom and those kind of things and interact with students, but they don't know me like they know their teacher, and they don't know me like they do their principal and things like that. And so that sort of pains me in the role that I'm in. I wish that were a little bit different. I'm one of those educators who I find great value and great stress relief and just joy being around our kids and being in classrooms and seeing our teachers do the work they do. I really loved being a school principal. I felt like I had direct impact on what happened in my school, be it just the climate of the school. I could provide different things to just make that school experience so great for everybody in the building. But I mean, I think every educator signed up to be a teacher, and I happened to be a coach the entire time that I was a teacher. And I think those relationships, these are grown people now with families that I still keep in touch with who are former students, and there's a direct line to the fruit of that labor when you do work like that. Superintendency for 2 years, I haven't seen that fruit. I believe that it's going to be there down the road, and I believe that impact hopefully will be greater in terms of multiple schools, lots of teachers and administrators and students who can be impacted by the work that I do. But it's hard to beat being a teacher in a classroom. It really is. That was a lot of fun and a lot of impact.
When I was talking to the coach at Gardendale, he talked about what you were talking about, where students will keep in touch with their coaches long after they've graduated, and the relationship between a coach and an athlete is very special.
It is. I've been to weddings. I've unfortunately been to funerals. I was recently just communicating with a former student of mine who was playing in the Final Four of this most recent March Madness tournament. They're all over the globe doing all sorts of things, and it's just really neat to know that you had a small part in their lives.
That's your fault.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Oh, that's a great feeling. It has to be. So, what are some things when you're not at school and when you're not, thinking about all of that? What do you like to do? How do you like to spend your free time? Do you like to go anywhere in Homewood?
Yeah, love our community. I'm around all the time, first of all, I have 3 little boys, so that takes the majority of my time. So we're very involved in youth sports. And
so you're over here like, free time, what's that?
Yeah, there is no free time in my life between superintendency, being a husband and a dad, involved in our church, some other stuff. But everything that I love really is in Homewood. I try really hard to not leave Homewood. I try hard for my tax dollars to stay in Homewood. My favorite barbecue joint's down the road at Saw's Barbecue. I'll grab an ice cream cone at Edgewood Creamery or over at Neighbors in West Homewood. I love food, so that's, you can probably tell by my appearance, but I do love food. So Ash over in West Homewood, Pizzeria GM, Gianmarco's. I mean, we have so many just really great places that I think that it bothers my wife a lot that, she may say something like, hey, let's go check out this other place. And I go, hey, we got this really good one right here at home. And we live in the Edgewood area, so a very walkable part of our community. Yeah. And so we're able to walk with our kids to lots of these places. So definitely do that. I love all things music, play multiple instruments.
Really?
Yeah, love live music. Like to play golf. I exercise, which is really more for my sanity than my physical health, but find a lot of value in that. Love to read, but I don't read as much as I would like to. Certainly love to travel, but don't travel as much as I would like to as well. So have some really precious friendships that I value very much, and try to allocate a lot of time to some of these men in my life that mean a lot to me. But that. In everything I just mentioned, there is very little time for most of that, and I'm pretty intentional on the time that I spend doing things. So outside of that, there is no more free time.
Hey, that's understandable. Yeah. That's a lot going on there. Yeah. I'm going to close out with 2 questions. One of them you kind of already touched on, and if you feel like your old answer was good enough, we'll just move on. What does it mean being a good neighbor? That's our theme for this season. So what are some ways that people can be a good neighbor, if you want to expand on that?
Yeah, it does go back to relationships. Being a good neighbor means that you're, we talked about it a little bit earlier, but you really are the type of person who is willing to put personal need beneath what a neighbor's need would be. That looks like compromise. That looks like good communication. It looks like patience. It looks like kindness. It looks like having enough humility to understand where they're coming from, where a neighbor may be coming from, both in frustration and not in frustration.
Yeah.
And I think just knowing that we are all flawed humans and they're just as flawed as I am, and that manifests in lots of different ways, but they deserve the same love and respect that I would hope they would give me too. So we can ruin relationships very, very quickly, and a relationship is very much like a house of cards, and you're very delicately putting that next card on that next tier of the house, and in one decision you can wipe that whole house of cards to become a pile of mess again. So being intentional, being thoughtful, remembering big things that are important to them, really to me are all good signs of being a good neighbor, which really translates to being a good friend,
Yeah.
a good spouse, a good superintendent.
All right. Thank you so much for that very expansive answer. What do you think the city of Homewood should focus on next?
So I trust our city leadership very much. These are people who I know pretty well. I've certainly watched the work that they've done. They're very invested in our community, love our community. So I'm probably the last person that would go to them and say, hey, here's what I think our city needs to do. Sometimes they call and ask, and maybe ask how that impacts our schools and things like that. And we have some good dialogue there. But this isn't necessarily what I think we should do. But I'll tell you some changes that have happened even in my time as a resident. We've become much more affluent in Homewood. Our home values have gone up very, very much. So much, in fact, that it's really hard to move into Homewood without significant money in terms of purchasing a home. I'm not advocating at all that we have cheaper housing, but I think that we value diversity in our community, and that comes in every form, certainly socioeconomic diversity. Some affordable housing, I think, is a part of who we've been, and ensures that there is some diversity, and there's a long history all over the country where that is not successful or sustainable. I think Homewood faces those same challenges right now, of just sort of a little bit of an identity crisis in terms of we didn't necessarily choose this success. I think we may have hoped it as residents, those kind of things, but it just sort of happened, and I think there's a recipe to that. Number one, being a really great school system, but people talk about how they love our diversity and how they love the walkability and the community feel, and it does it feels like a small town in a very large metropolitan area. Brookwood Mall is a place that I think has become pretty abandoned at this point. Most shops and stores have left, and I think that property has got to be, this isn't my field of expertise, but it sure has to be one of the most valuable pieces of land in the Southeast. Most of that is zoned for Homewood. A little piece of it's zoned for Mountain Brook. I'm curious about what developers would do with that space, and some different proposals have been made out there and things like that. But my hope for Homewood is that who we've grown to love about ourselves, and those things that I described, that we fight hard to keep that intact while balancing the success of what's happening in our community. So it's very easy to say, very, very challenging to achieve. So
that's one of the things that multiple people, when I was talking to Gardendale, they said was fighting to keep community alive is so important, because once you lose it, it's almost impossible to get back. And, you got to hold on to it, because as you grow, the risk of losing it increases.
It does. And we've lost community, period, in pandemic. Just the sense of community. And again, pandemic sent us all into some sort of trauma. Some of us got really angry in that. We didn't like that our lives were being dictated or controlled. We wanted our freedoms. We were scared to death that we were going to die. We were scared that our children were going to die. All sorts of things.
There's all kinds of emotion.
It brought a lot out, and it really caused the community feel, and every community, and Homewood wasn't immune to this. It made us all a little fragile, and I think building community back is such a big part of what everybody's going to have to do, and that's far beyond home values and those types of things. But loving your neighbor really well is the first step in building community again. So I think as we've gone outside again, as we've lived normal lives again, as we've taken off masks or keeping masks on, and as we've come to acceptance of what that looks like for every individual and loving somebody where they are in that process, we'll just continue to build community. But we have a chance to either split and be split forever, or we have the chance to really rally around one another and become a great community like we've been.
Well, I can tell you where I'm sitting is on the pro community. I'm hoping to, build community and help strengthen community. So is there anything that you'd like to add before we close out?
No.
No?
No.
Well, I think we've said a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Justin, for coming on to the show.
This was a ton of fun. Glad to be a part of it. Honored that you asked.
I'm honored that you said yes.
It's great.
Thank you for listening to the Your City podcast. I hope that you enjoyed our talk today with Justin. You can help us out by supporting the show and donating on PayPal by using the link in the description to help us keep making the show and improving it. There's more that we would like to do with this idea, and we appreciate any support in helping us achieve our goal of creating better communities, not just for Homewood, but for other cities as well. Thank you again for listening, and we will catch you on the next one.